On this episode of China Uncensored, if you go to a Chinese pop concert, hide your face. Trump wants you to know that everything with China will work out fine. Or maybe it won't. And going to watch the new Avengers movie in China, one theater has a special tip for all the ladies. This is China Uncensored. Hi, welcome to China Uncensored. I'm your host, Chris Chappell. China has gotten one step closer to putting an unmanned spacecraft on the far side of the moon. On Monday, they launched a relay satellite. It won't actually land on the moon, but it will help with the landing process for a future craft. China's military-led space program wants to be the first to land on the far side of the moon. It's sometimes also called the dark side because that side always faces away from the Earth. The new relay satellite would help solve the issue of communication. So, if China does manage to make it to the dark side of the moon later this year, they'll be the first to get a clear view of when the Decepticons attack. But Chinese technological breakthroughs aren't just going to the dark side of the moon. The dark side of technology has also arrived in China. Chinese authorities just arrested a dangerous fugitive by the name of Yu at the concert of a famous Hong Kong singer, Jackie Chung, whose nickname is the God of Songs. How did police find the man in that crowd? Simple. Facial recognition software picked out his face as he entered the venue. Local police wrote on their WeChat account, wearing a smile as he came to see his idol, he hadn't realized that he was already being watched. That's not creepy. They'd been watching for him for 3 years. And get this, this is the third time in 2 months that a fugitive was caught this way. At a Jackie Chung concert. Wait a minute. Is Jackie Chung a secret crime fighter known as the God of Songs whose superpower is luring criminals to his concerts? That would explain so much. So, what was the heinous crime Yu committed that got him arrested at the concert? He owed almost $20,000 on unpaid potatoes. That's no small potatoes. Wait, what use could anyone have for $20,000 worth of potatoes? Perhaps it's the God of Song's arch nemesis, Chairman Potato Head? Anyway, these kinds of arrests using facial recognition will happen more and more. The Chinese Communist Party has invested heavily in AI-powered surveillance cameras. Within 3 years, they plan to add 400 million new cameras capable of recognizing and tracking citizens. They will also be able to identify your car and your friends. Here's another fun fact about China's facial recognition surveillance program. They've started installing it in schools, behind the blackboard, to see how much kids are paying attention, tracking every movement of students' pupils. I know that sounds disturbing, especially if you've ever fallen asleep in class, but don't worry, the system can be fooled. In other news, Burkina Faso has severed diplomatic relations with Taiwan, reminding the world that Burkina Faso still exists. The US and China are continuing trade talks. Last week, Liu He, China's vice premier and top economic advisor to Xi Jinping, met with US President Donald Trump. Liu gave a good presentation. According to Larry Kudlow, the head of the National Economic Council, President Trump was very engaged. I bet. One of the main issues was the nearly $400 billion trade deficit the United States has with China. President Trump wants that reduced by half. U.S. officials say China has proposed achieving that by buying more U.S. goods. But it seems that President Trump doubts the trade talks will work out.
Now, will that be successful? I tend to doubt it. The reason I doubt it is because China's become very spoiled. The European Union has become very spoiled. Other countries have become very spoiled because they always got 100% of whatever they wanted from the United States. But we can't allow that to happen anymore.
He also tweeted this week that the trade deal would need a different structure to succeed. Speaking of different structures, President Trump has canceled the Singapore summit with North Korean leader Kim Jong-un. That comes after North Korea had made increasingly harsh statements, including one that threatened a nuclear showdown and called Vice President Mike Pence a political dummy, to which the White House strenuously objected because, quote, only President Trump gets to call Mike Pence a political dummy. Last week, Trump had already thrown some doubt on the summit while maybe, possibly, blaming China for things going wrong.
I think things changed a little bit when they met with China. They met a second time. As you know, Kim Jong-un had a second meeting with China, which was a little bit of a surprise meeting. There has been a big difference since they had the second meeting with President Xi. With that being said, my attitude is whatever happens, happens.
Could there be trouble in bromance paradise? Only time will tell. Avengers Infinity War. It's called that because it will go on forever. And it's out in China. And one theater in Inner Mongolia had a very special message for the ladies in the audience.
You should do nothing but eat your popcorn silently. Don't mess with your man while he is worshiping the silver screen. If your man gets really excited while watching the movie, please pretend to be interested. And based on his facial expressions, you should say things like yes and totally.
But before you go crying sexism, yes, there was a message to the men in the audience as well.
Don't try to explain the characters to your women in the middle of the movie. They won't be able to recognize them, just like you can't differentiate between lipsticks. Get them some popcorn, soda, and snacks to keep their mouths full.
A communist utopia. And finally, Zhao Kangmin has passed away at the age of 81. You may not know his name, but I bet you know the thing he's famous for. No, he wasn't a terracotta warrior. He was the archaeologist who discovered the terracotta warriors. Or more accurately, he pieced together tiny fragments of pottery until they formed the terracotta warriors. The terracotta warriors were made some 2,000 years ago by Emperor Qin Shi Huang, the first emperor to unite China, and they've become perhaps one of the most recognizable symbols of ancient Chinese heritage. But get this, at first, Zhao and his colleagues were afraid to announce the find, because it was during the middle of the Cultural Revolution, where across China, Mao Zedong had directed people to destroy anything from China's cultural past. Fortunately for everyone, the terracotta warriors were treated better than all those teachers and intellectuals who were killed. Maybe that's because Mao Zedong admired Emperor Qin, who made them. Qin was the emperor who himself bragged about killing hundreds of Confucian scholars for having traditional beliefs. Fortunately, his dynasty only lasted 15 years. And before we wrap up, here's a question from Heppe Christensen. If China is to get rid of the CCP and become a democracy and maybe unite with Taiwan again, where do you see the push for change to come from in China? Interesting question. This is something I've thought a lot about. One scenario that could happen is that the CCP would start to lose control of some of the southern provinces of China, particularly Guangdong and Guangxi. Those are Cantonese-speaking provinces, which aligns them culturally and linguistically with Hong Kong. And we know how Hong Kongers love to dissent. Plus, Guangdong is where Shenzhen is, the city that manufactures all your electronics. As the Communist Party loses its grip on power, it would focus its energies on maintaining control over Beijing and the surrounding regions. Now, this doesn't have to be a violent revolution. In fact, across the world, the vast majority of political change in the past 2 decades has come through nonviolent resistance. In fact, the data shows nonviolent resistance is actually more effective. But of course, that's just one way things could go down. Maybe President Xi Jinping does such a good job, they decide to just get rid of the Communist Party and let him rule for life. Thanks for your question. Remember, if you want to leave a question for me, sign up to support China Uncensored on the website Patreon. Link is below. Thanks for watching this episode of China Uncensored. Once again, I'm your host, Chris Chappell. See you next time. Thanks for watching. Want to make China Uncensored even better? Of course you do. Click this orange button to support China Uncensored on Patreon. Join our 50-cent army. Click here to see what cool perks you'll get.